Before Jet Li became a global icon, before Hollywood, before wire fu and digital effects, there was one film where his real skills were pushed to the absolute limit: The Master. #10. The Master was marketed as a Jet Li clone, but it almost destroyed his career momentum. When The Master was released in 1989, Jet Li was still riding the massive success of Shaolin Temple, and Once Upon a Time in China was still years away. Audiences in Hong Kong didn't see Jet Li as a movie star yet. They saw him as something more dangerous for an actor's future, a martial arts symbol. Producers knew this, and instead of letting Jet Li grow naturally, they tried to turn him into a ready-made brand. The Master was sold hard as another unbeatable Jet Li kung fu spectacle. Posters emphasized his kicks, his poses, his invincible aura. But behind the scenes, the film was rushed, under-directed, and built on a formula that assumed Jet Li's physical ability alone could carry the entire movie. In American terms, this would be like throwing a rookie NBA phenom into a championship game with no real game plan and expecting pure talent to win. Jet Li wasn't given a layered character to work with. His role was written almost entirely around reaction. Reacting to villains, reacting to injustice, reacting to betrayal. That might sound fine for an action film, but it left him with very little emotional control over the story. Instead of driving the plot, he was constantly catching up to it. What made this especially risky was timing. In 1989, Hong Kong cinema was shifting fast. Jackie Chan had already proven that personality plus action was the future. Chow Yun-fat was redefining masculinity through gun fu and emotional gravitas. Jet Li, meanwhile, was being boxed into the role of silent, unstoppable fighter. The Master reinforced that box instead of breaking it. From a career perspective, this film nearly froze Jet Li in place. Studios began seeing him not as an evolving actor, but as a reliable physical tool. He later admitted in interviews that this period was frustrating. He felt replaceable, interchangeable, and creatively limited. If The Master had been a bigger hit, Jet Li might have been trapped in low-depth action roles for years. Ironically, the film's weaknesses ended up helping him in the long run. Its mixed reception forced Jet Li to rethink his path. Instead of accepting every role built purely around fighting, he began pushing for stronger narratives, historical weight, and moral complexity, choices that eventually led to Once Upon a Time in China and international respect. So while The Master looked like a safe bet on paper, it was actually one of the most dangerous moments in Jet Li's early career, a reminder that raw talent without direction can stall even the most gifted performer. Number 9. Jet Li performed some of his most physically punishing scenes without cinematic protection. Unlike many martial arts films of the era, The Master relied far less on camera tricks than audiences might assume. There were no heavy wire systems, no modern editing rhythms, and very limited stunt doubles. What you see on screen is, more often than not, Jet Li actually doing it, at full speed, full power. By 1989, Jet Li had already retired from competitive wushu. His body was transitioning from elite athlete to working actor, which is a dangerous phase physically. Muscles that once trained for precision and tournaments were suddenly being pushed into repetitive takes, awkward angles, and uncontrolled environments. Imagine a former Olympic gymnast suddenly performing on uneven concrete floors with unpredictable partners. That's essentially what Jet Li faced during The Master. Several fight scenes required extended takes with no cuts, forcing Jet Li to maintain explosive movement while reacting to untrained extras or aggressive stunt performers. These weren't choreographed dance fights, they were closer to controlled chaos. Miss a step, mistime a kick, or lose footing, and the consequences were real. What's rarely mentioned is how little recovery time he had. Filming schedules were brutal. Scenes were shot back to back, often without proper warm-ups or cool-downs. Jet Li later described the exhaustion as deeper than tournament fatigue. In competition, you fight for minutes. On set, you fight for hours, again and again, while staying emotionally neutral so the camera can capture the same intensity every take. From a modern American filmmaking perspective, this would be unthinkable. Today, stars are surrounded by safety coordinators, physiotherapists, and digital backups. In The Master, Jet Li had none of that. The film industry expected his body to absorb the cost. This physical toll shaped his future choices more than people realize. The injuries and strain he endured here directly influenced his preference for more controlled, stylized choreography later in his career. He didn't become softer, he became smarter. He learned that longevity mattered more than proving toughness on every frame. Watching The Master today with that knowledge changes everything. What once looked like simple action now feels raw and almost reckless. Each kick carries risk, each fall has weight. And in that sense, the film unintentionally documents a moment when Jet Li was still paying for authenticity with his own body. It's one of the last times we see Jet Li fighting not as a calculated movie icon, but as a man still transitioning out of the discipline and danger of real martial arts life. Number 8. The film's villains reflected late 80s anxiety about identity and belonging. One of the most overlooked aspects of The Master is how its antagonists quietly mirror the social anxiety of the late 1980s, especially in Hong Kong cinema. On the surface, the villains feel straightforward, aggressive, arrogant, violent, but beneath that simplicity is something more interesting. They represent a fear that was becoming increasingly visible at the time, the fear of losing cultural identity in a rapidly changing world. In The Master, Jet Li's character is repeatedly confronted not just by physical threats, but by people who mock tradition, abuse power, and treat martial arts as domination rather than discipline. These villains don't respect lineage, teachers, or moral restraint. They fight to humiliate, to prove superiority, not to test skill. This wasn't accidental. During this period, Hong Kong was wrestling with questions about its future, its values, and what would survive modernization. From an American storytelling perspective, this dynamic is similar to the way late 80s action films often portrayed villains as symbols of moral decay, greedy businessmen, corrupt authority figures, or hyperviolent outsiders who lacked a code. Think of how Die Hard framed its antagonists not just as criminals, but as embodiments of excess and arrogance. The Master does something similar, but through the lens of martial arts culture. Jet Li's character stands in contrast as someone rooted in discipline, humility, and restraint. He doesn't seek confrontation, he's pushed into it. Every fight becomes less about winning and more about preserving a way of life that's under threat. This gives the action a subtle emotional layer, even when the script doesn't spell it out. What's especially striking is how the villains often fight ugly. They gang up, use cheap tactics, and rely on intimidation rather than technique. This wasn't just for spectacle. It visually reinforced the idea that strength without ethics leads to chaos. Jet Li's clean movements and precise strikes become a moral argument as much as a physical one. Although the film never pauses to explain these themes, audiences at the time instinctively felt them. Viewers weren't just watching a kung fu movie. They were watching a symbolic struggle between respect and recklessness, tradition and erosion. This is one reason The Master still feels tense today. The conflict isn't outdated, it's timeless. Number 7. Jet Li's on-screen restraint was a deliberate choice, not a lack of charisma. A common criticism of The Master is that Jet Li feels emotionally distant, almost too quiet for a leading role. But that interpretation misses a crucial detail. His restraint was intentional, shaped by both his background and the expectations placed on him at the time. Jet Li came from a competitive wushu environment where expression was controlled, not exaggerated. Movements were clean, efficient, and purposeful. There was no room for theatrical flourish. When he transitioned into film, that mindset didn't disappear overnight. In The Master, he carries himself like an athlete still bound by discipline rather than an actor chasing attention. From a modern American viewpoint, this kind of performance can feel understated, especially when compared to more expressive action stars. But restraint can be powerful when understood correctly. Jet Li's calm demeanor creates contrast. When violence erupts, it feels earned, not performative. He doesn't posture, he reacts. This approach also aligned with how the character was written. His role wasn't meant to charm the audience, it was meant to embody control. He absorbs insults, endures humiliation, and avoids escalation until there's no other option. Behind the scenes, this was also a strategic move. Later roles allowed him to smile more, express doubt, and show vulnerability. And when it finally surfaces, it hits harder because it was held back for so long. Number 6. The film captured a transitional moment between traditional kung fu cinema and modern action storytelling. The master sits in a strange, but fascinating position in martial arts film history. It was released at a time when traditional kung fu cinema was starting to lose dominance, yet modern action filmmaking hadn't fully taken over. This placed the movie, and Jet Li himself, in an in-between space that shaped everything from pacing to fight choreography. Earlier kung fu films were built around clear moral structure and ritualized combat. Fighters bowed, challenged one another, and followed unspoken rules. By the late 1980s, audiences were changing. Viewers wanted faster movement, higher stakes, and a sense that fights could erupt anywhere, not just in formal settings. The master reflects that shift almost scene by scene. Many confrontations in the film feel sudden and messy. Fights break out in streets, workplaces, and public spaces without warning. There's very little ceremony. This was a major departure from older kung fu storytelling, where combat often felt staged like a duel. In The Master, violence interrupts daily life, which makes it feel more dangerous and less romantic. From an American perspective, this mirrors the evolution seen in action films during the same era. Compare early martial arts imports with the gritty realism creeping into Hollywood action movies in the late 80s. Audiences were moving away from idealized heroes and toward characters who looked like they could get hurt. The master leans into that discomfort. Jet Li's fighting style reflects this transition as well. His movements remain precise and disciplined, but the environment around him is chaotic. He's forced to adapt rather than dominate. Instead of showcasing long, uninterrupted forms, the fights emphasize reaction, survival, and timing. This makes the action feel raw, even when the choreography is clearly structured. What's important here is that the master didn't fully commit to either side. It wasn't traditional enough to satisfy purists, and it wasn't modern enough to redefine the genre. That's why it is often remembered as an odd entry in Jet Li's filmography. But that awkwardness is exactly what makes it valuable today. The film becomes a snapshot of a genre in motion. You can feel the industry testing boundaries, unsure which direction to take. Jet Li, standing at the center of that uncertainty, becomes a symbol of change rather than continuity. In hindsight, the master helped pave the way for the balance Jet Li would later perfect, blending classical discipline with cinematic storytelling. It may not have solved the problem, but it asked the right questions at the right time. #5 Jet Li's physical presence told more of the story than the script ever did. One of the most revealing aspects of The Master is how much of the storytelling depends on Jet Li's body language rather than dialogue. The script itself is relatively simple, even thin in places. But Jet Li fills those gaps through posture, movement, and stillness. Unlike many action stars who rely on verbal dominance, Jet Li communicates through control. The way he enters a room, the way he positions his feet, the way he pauses before responding, these details quietly establish hierarchy. Even when surrounded by louder, more aggressive characters, his presence recenters the scene. This is especially noticeable in moments of confrontation that don't immediately turn violent. Jet Li often stands relaxed while others tense up. His calm becomes unsettling. It suggests confidence born from experience, not bravado. From a storytelling standpoint, this allows the audience to sense danger before a single punch is thrown. In American cinema, this technique is often associated with seasoned actors who understand how to command space. Think of how certain characters can dominate a scene without raising their voice. Jet Li achieves that effect physically, not verbally. What makes this impressive is that it wasn't yet a refined acting technique for him. Jet Li was still learning how to translate athletic discipline into cinematic expression. Yet instinctively, he understood that stillness could be just as powerful as motion. When he finally explodes into action, the contrast amplifies the impact. The film also uses repetition to reinforce this idea. Each time Jet Li is forced into conflict, his response follows a pattern: hesitation, assessment, controlled engagement, resolution. This rhythm becomes familiar, almost ritualistic. It teaches the audience how to read him without explanation. Critics who dismiss the master as shallow often overlook this layer entirely. They judge the film by its dialogue and plot mechanics, missing the physical storytelling happening in plain sight. Jet Li wasn't just performing fights, he was shaping character through movement. This approach would later become one of his greatest strengths. In future roles, directors learned how to frame him, how to let silence work, how to trust the audience to understand physical nuance. The Master was an early experiment in that direction. Seen this way, the film becomes less about what's said and more about what's shown. And what is shown is a performer beginning to understand the language of cinema, one movement at a time. Number for the Master revealed how Jet Li was still learning to act for the camera, not just perform martial arts. By the time The Master was made, Jet Li was already an elite martial artist with years of competitive experience and several films behind him. Yet one crucial skill was still developing: acting for the camera, not just for physical display. This distinction matters more than it sounds, and the Master captures that learning curve in real time. In competitive wushu, performance is outward. Movements are designed to be seen clearly from a distance, judged for precision, balance, and explosive power. Film acting works in the opposite direction. The camera notices micro-movements, a tightening jaw, a flicker of doubt, a breath held too long. In The Master, Jet Li was still transitioning between these worlds. There are moments where his reactions feel slightly delayed or overly controlled, not because he lacked emotion, but because he was calibrating how much to show. This wasn't stiffness, it was caution. He understood that exaggeration would look fake on film, yet he hadn't fully mastered subtle emotional projection either. The result is a performance that feels restrained to the point of tension. From a Western filmmaking perspective, this phase resembles what many athletes turned actors experience early on. They know how to perform under pressure, but not yet how to let vulnerability leak through. Jet Li often holds his emotions behind a composed exterior, forcing the audience to read between the lines. Interestingly, this works in the film's favor more often than not. His character is meant to be emotionally expressive. He's isolated, displaced, and constantly under threat. His emotional containment mirrors his circumstances. Instead of dramatic speeches, we get quiet endurance. Instead of overt rage, we get controlled escalation. What makes this noteworthy is how quickly Jet Li evolved after this film. Later performances show greater emotional fluidity, humor, sorrow, doubt, warmth. But The Master shows the foundation being laid. He was learning how to let the camera come to him instead of performing past it. This transitional quality gives the film an almost documentary feel at times. You're not just watching a character. You're watching an actor figuring out how to exist inside a cinematic frame. That honesty, intentional or not, gives the movie a raw authenticity that polished performances sometimes lack. Number 3. The film's rough edges came from production limitations, not a lack of vision. Many criticisms aimed at the master focus on its uneven pacing, abrupt transitions, and occasionally underdeveloped scenes. While those flaws are real, they're often misunderstood. They weren't the result of creative laziness. They were symptoms of the production environment Jet Li was working in at the time. Hong Kong cinema in the late 1980s operated at a breakneck speed. Films were shot quickly, budgets were tight, and schedules were unforgiving. Directors and actors had to make fast decisions, often sacrificing refinement for completion. The master was no exception. Scenes that feel rushed today were likely trimmed or simplified to meet deadlines. Character moments that could have deepened relationships were shortened to prioritize action. This wasn't unique to this film, it was standard industry practice. From an American production standpoint, it would be like shooting a full-length action movie in a fraction of the time Hollywood typically allowed. Despite these constraints, the film shows clear intent. There's a consistent thematic through line about discipline versus chaos, restraint versus aggression. The problem isn't that the filmmakers didn't know what they wanted to say. It's that they didn't always have the time or resources to say it fully. Jet Li's performance helps bridge these gaps. His physical storytelling fills in where the script falls short. His reactions provide continuity when editing jumps ahead too quickly. In many ways, he becomes the film's stabilizing force. Looking back, it's easy to judge the master by modern standards, but doing so misses the context that shaped it. This was a film made under pressure, in an industry that valued momentum over perfection. And within that environment, it still managed to capture something meaningful. Those rough edges are part of its identity. They remind us that cinema doesn't always emerge from ideal conditions. Sometimes it's forged in compromise. And sometimes, those imperfections preserve a moment in time that polished productions erase. Number 2. The master helped Jet Li understand what kind of star he did not want to become. By the time the master wrapped production, Jet Li had gained something more valuable than box office success: clarity. This film quietly taught him what kind of career path would eventually limit him rather than elevate him. And that realization became a turning point. Up to this stage, Jet Li was being shaped by the industry more than he was shaping it himself. Roles came with expectations already attached: minimal dialogue, maximum fighting, stoic presence, interchangeable storylines. The master followed that pattern closely, and living inside it showed Jet Li the cost of staying there too long. He began to recognize that being admired purely for physical ability was unstable. Skills fade, bodies were down, audiences move on. What lasts is identity. And the master made it clear that if he didn't actively define his screen persona, others would do it for him, usually in the simplest, most limiting way possible. From an American career perspective, this is similar to what many action stars face early on. They become typecast before they've had time to grow. Jet Li saw that future approaching fast. Instead of resisting quietly, he adjusted his strategy. He started choosing roles with historical weight, moral tension, and cultural grounding. He wanted characters who stood for something, not just fighters who reacted to threats. This shift didn't happen overnight, but the master planted the seed. It showed him that repetition without evolution leads to stagnation. It also revealed that audiences were capable of appreciating more depth if given the chance. Later performances would reflect this lesson clearly. His characters became teachers, protectors, conflict-ed heroes, figures defined by values, not just strength. Looking back, the master feels like the final test of an old approach before Jet Li consciously stepped into a new phase of his career. In that sense, the film wasn't a dead end, it was a boundary, and crossing it required Jet Li, to stop being just a martial artist on screen and start becoming a storyteller through action. Number 1. The master preserved a rare, unfiltered version of Jet Li that no longer exists. What ultimately makes the master so fascinating today, in its polish, its plot, or even its choreography, it's the version of Jet Li captured, a version that would never appear on screen again. This was Jet Li before global fame, before Hollywood, before carefully engineered fight scenes and international marketing strategies. His movements weren't optimized for cinema yet. His performance wasn't calibrated for worldwide audiences. What we see is raw ability meeting an imperfect medium. There's an honesty in that. Every kick carries weight. Every pause feels unprotected. He isn't performing an image. He is inhabiting a body still transitioning from competition to storytelling. That authenticity can be recreated once an actor becomes fully aware of their brand. From a modern viewing standpoint, this is rare. Today's action stars are surrounded by layers of control, choreography teams, safety systems, digital enhancement. The master exists outside that ecosystem. It documents a time when martial arts cinema still demanded something real from the performer. Jet Li would later become more refined, more expressive, more cinematic. But he would never again be this unfiltered. The industry wouldn't allow it, and neither would experience. That's what gives the film its lasting value. Even with its flaws, the master stands as a snapshot of potential in motion, not the finished icon, but the human being still figuring out how to survive, adapt, and grow inside an unforgiving industry. And that makes it more than just another early Jet Li movie. It makes it a moment, frozen in time, when everything was still undecided. If you enjoyed breaking down these hidden facts behind Jet Li's The Master 1989, don't forget to like the video to support the channel and help this story reach more martial arts fans. Share it with friends who love classic kung fu cinema and untold film history. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into iconic action movies, forgotten classics, and the real stories behind legendary stars. Join the channel to unlock exclusive members-only content, behind-the-scenes breakdowns, and extended film analysis. And if you'd like to support us directly, hit the thanks button below. Every contribution helps us keep uncovering the stories that shaped action cinema history.